Okay, so my talk discusses endangered language ideologies and attitudes and their impact on the maintenance of two Arbe resh varieties of Sicily. I first have to apologize because I have flu or something, I don't know, so my voice is a bit cracky. So please, if you can't hear me at any time, just tell me and I will try to speak louder. So the communities of Piana degli Albanesi, which has a population of around about 7,000, and Santa Cristina Gela with a population of 900, are situated in the Metropolitan City of Palermo in Sicily, and they speak two virtually mutually intelligible varieties of the Arbe resh language. This is where they are situated. It's about 20 kilometers from Palermo, the capital of Sicily. At night, it takes 15 minutes to drive from Palermo to Santa Cristina Gela. The founders of Piana in 1488 called themselves Greeks, and they were forbidden from mixing with or even allowing Sicilians to enter their town. In fact, Sicilians who are called Liti or Latins, Litin, were only permitted once a year, twice a year for festivals, and they had to have a passport. Ndahstina or Santa Cristina, which is my heritage village, was founded in 1699 by 80 families from Piana, who immediately mixed with Sicilians. It's the norm in Santa Cristina, not the exception, to have both albanophone and Sicilian ancestors. 2/3 of my ancestors are actually from other villages and moved into Santa Cristina Gela. In many cases, there are families with no known albanophone ancestors. I know people who none of their great-grandparents came from the village, but as they moved in, they integrated with the albanophone speakers. So their grandparents became Arbe resh speakers, and today they are ndahstina, they are Arbe resh like everybody else. Ndahstina people do not see themselves as Albanian, but as Sicilian. This is a common attitude reflected by almost everybody in the village. And I have a video clip of my cousin telling me this on the camera.
Allora, ngete, për neve di së ndahstina, mendrit e Hora kanë klënë sempre lidhur me shqiptarët, na një skaj më pak. Së ndahstina një skaj më pak.
So I asked her, do you consider yourself Albanian? And she said, I don't know, because for us from Santa Cristina, compared to Piana, they've always felt a bit more linked with Albanians. Us in Santa Cristina, we're a bit less. So code switching is viewed as unhealthy and the result of attrition. Educational materials and language landscaping reflect this view, which completely remove those elements, including Sicilian borrowings. And to reverse language shift, some have suggested the teaching of Standard Albanian or the creation of a hybrid drawing on Standard Albanian and the local language. So the local sign language landscape also reflects this view. This is often seen as an example of bilingualism with Arbe resh or protection of the Arbe resh language. But as you can see, these signs are in Standard Albanian and Italian. Studies have shown that the majority of the language landscape is unintelligible to locals, with the exception of carabinieret. All of the other terms on that sign don't mean anything in Arbe resh. And this reflects an ideology of language purism and nation-state language policies. And as I said, these are often showcased as an example of the protection that Arbe resh enjoys. But this is a foreign language. They're not Arbe resh. This reflects a model of revitalization so far practiced in Piana, to a lesser extent in Santa Cristina, which has attempted to model Standard Albanian and purify the speech of Sicilian elements. The result has not been favored by the majority of locals, who express a desire to maintain their language, not to replace it with either an Albanian or a hybrid of Arbe resh and Albanian. Sicilian words in Arbe resh are accepted by locals and valued, even if sometimes purist ideologies are reproduced. As we know, what people say they do and what they do are often at odds. I have an example of that.
Certo, më merr një fjalë shqipe se no një siciliane.
And this is ironic because he uses Sicilian words to reinforce the notion that Sicilian words are less preferable. He also replaces the local word Albanese, or what's commonly referred to as shqiptare, to refer to the Albanian language, with a standard Albanian word. Shqipe is standard Albanian, pronounced in the local accent. So how does this reflect on ideologies? So ideologies are beliefs, feelings, and assumptions about language that are socially shared and which attempt to make sense of different forms of the language and their place in society. They derive from social, historical, and political ideas about language and have pervasive and often irreversible effects on language attitudes and linguistic practices in many minority language contexts. The study of language ideologies and beliefs can provide insights into reasons for both language decline and revival, and may help us to assess the likely success or otherwise of language revitalization projects. Researching language ideologies is imperative to the investigation and effective revitalization of endangered languages. Researching, revealing, and challenging consciously accepted ideologies can demonstrate the possibility of overcoming deeply ingrained beliefs about the inferiority of particular ways of speaking. This can also overcome the assumption that a small language needs to have all the attributes of a larger one. And this questions whether minority languages need to be written or standardized. So how these ideologies are reflected in the community. The sort of political elite, or the academic or scholarly elite from Piana particularly, claim to speak better or clearer forms of language. And they refer to those who use Italian or Sicilian lexicon as ignorantra, ignorant, and even selvaggi, savages. So they, again, it's ironic that they use a word like ignorantra, which is borrowed from Sicilian originally. And the way that they refer to speakers who mix and use this Italian and Sicilian lexicon is very loaded with xenophobic and even racist undertones. So they're usually based on ideas of linguistic hygiene, with Sicilian being contamination. Some of them have created Facebook groups and published materials aimed at the revitalization of Arbe resh. And this is an example of one of them. So what you see is it says Shkruan urtsicht për gjithmonë Arbe resh. I had to look up the meaning of urtsicht and për gjithmonë, and nobody can really understand that. It means I write I always write in a high fashion in Arbe resh. Yeah, I write wisely forever in Arbe resh, but it's very difficult to understand. It's not intelligible to Arbe resh. Only Shkruan in Arbe resh is intelligible there. So the rules of that group are to only write in Arbe resh, yet rarely do we find everyday Arbe resh being used in the group. The majority of its active users are actually Balkan Albanians who do not translate their posts into Arbe resh. If you dare to write in everyday Arbe resh, you get corrected on that page and told that you don't speak properly. This is a post from the founder of this group, and it says you cannot give the right to someone who doesn't know what they're saying. You cannot say that that person is right if they don't know what they're saying. Otherwise, we could add even Swahili and Hottentot words. So Hottentot is a type of basically outdated word that reflects this idea of savages. And the person also says, if there exists a grammar, it exists to give rules that even those who are ignorant should follow, listening to those who know more or better. So this is the attitude that's reflected by the community leaders. So is Arbe resh translanguaging or code switching? First, I would like to verify what translanguaging is. It's the deployment of the full repertoire, the speaker's full repertoire, without regard for adherence to socially and politically defined boundaries of named languages. excuse me. It questions or challenges the notion that bilinguals deploy distinct and separate linguistic systems in speech, and is a practical theory of fluid and dynamic practices that transcend boundaries between named languages and varieties. It can also be seen as an insider perspective. This is different from the concept of code switching because the latter connotes separate systems that are not in fact separate in practice. Code switching is an outsider's perspective, and it sees the speaker switching between separate languages. So the TransLanguaging model may help disrupt the socially constructed hierarchies that suppress minority language practices. And this might allow us to shift from a museification, i.e. the preservation of languages. Like, we don't want our language to be in a museum, and we're not pickles, you know, we don't want to be preserved. We want our language to be maintained and sustained. So this can help us shift to that. And this TransLanguaging approach in the following video, sorry, there's a typo there, in the following video sample would question the notion that bilingual speakers deploy distinct and separate linguistic systems in speech. A code switching approach, on the other hand, might view this following sample as an example of separate systems switched throughout the discourse. And it also shows how locals identify regarding the Albanian language.
Jo, ajo shqiptare është diferente, dhe shumë, jo dhe pak. Janë diversi albanesi që kanë këtu të Hora. Insomma, ormai drungojnë bërçan, që ata ormai mësojnë gluhën jone. Pero janë shumë fjalë që një drungojnë. Ma ormai a maggior parte i njoh. Perché kam shumë miq albanesi, perciò a maggior parte delle fiale ti njoh. Però një më dish për kaj.
Je sicilian, je italian, je albanese, je
Ormai më gjithë siciliane.
Je sicilian.
So he said there, no, that Albanian, referring to standard Albanian, is different by a lot, not by a little. I asked if he'd heard it, and he said, yes, there are various Albanians that live here or in Piana, and more or less we understand each other because they also learn our language. But there are many words which we don't understand. I asked if he wanted to learn it. He said, well, more or less, I know the main part, i.e. majority of the words, because I have many Albanian friends. Because the majority of the words I know, but I wouldn't mind, i.e. to learn it. I asked if he's Sicilian, Italian, Albanian, or Arbe resh, and his answer was basically we're all Sicilians. And I've got the color coding there to show which original language code it comes from. So blue means Italian, red means Sicilian, and black is the Arbe resh Albanian base. And as you can see, it's all combined in a sort of fused lect. Or this is what I'm asking, if this is code switching, or is this translanguaging, or what is this? So in the following video, the speaker says that Sicilian words in our language show our story and enrich our language. She begins the statement by saying it makes it a completely rich language. And she says this is how it should be, as we do not live in a bubble, which she calls a football, but she means a bubble. This is reflected by most of my interlocutors during my master's research, and is certainly the view held by my family members and most speakers that I know.
Që bun një gluh e qosme, kompletamente e qosme. Fjalët siciliane te gluha jon ftojun la nostra storia. Perciò na jemi in Sicilia, kemi rritur in Sicilia 6 secoli, no? 5, quasi 6 secoli. Allora, një mund rrim si duket të një balun. Jemi midema siciliani, na jemi siciliani. jemi Arbe resh e jemi Sicilian. E fjalët që na dhanë, që morum, e ishte giusto se ka jetë shtu. Ishte giusto.
So I have some concluding questions that I'd like to put to the audience. Could we view Arbe resh speakers as making full use of their linguistic repertoire, rather than view them as switching or mixing languages and therefore having a problem with their language? Or, and are we trying to model Arbe resh revitalization on larger languages like Albanian and Italian? And are purist attitudes actually endangering Arbe resh in this context? And could TransLanguaging offer an alternative perspective? And I believe that's the end. Grazie, Eucharistis, thank you.